I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest today is Congressman Khanna. He's a representative from California's 17th Congressional District. Khanna, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for your independent voice.
So the first question I have for you is about the economy. So I've been talking to a lot of people, particularly those who are working class and those who are poor. And right now, a lot of Americans are struggling due to inflation. Meanwhile, the U.S. government, we've seen our government give billions of dollars to people in Ukraine. So I have to ask, where is the money for the American people? Like, why is the government giving this or not giving this money to working class and poor people during a time when they so desperately need it?
Well, we should be investing in our people. That's why we have to pass the president's reconciliation bill, provide child care, provide tuition-free community college, provide prescription drug relief. We should pass my windfall profits tax on oil and give that money back to the working and middle-class Americans for the hike in their gas bills. So there are a lot of bills that we've been passing in the House that need to pass the Senate. And I agree with you. The priority has to be the working class, the middle class here at home.
What could be done to help American people now? And the reason why I ask is because I've had a couple of people reach out to me and they've told me that they had to leave their job because they just can't afford gas to get back and forth to work. Like if they're making $7.25 an hour and gas is $4, where they're just basically making money to pay for gas and get to work. And do you foresee any type of stimulus package going back out to people to help people out, at least for the short term?
Well, there are two things we could do. One is we could pass my windfall profits tax on big oil on the 30 billion profits and then have the checks that would go to working class and middle class folks to pay for their gas increase. It would be about $300, but that would cover some of the increase in gas. And the other thing that we can do is buy oil at the cheap price and then sell it back at a subsidized price to put downward pressure on the oil prices and to stop exporting the oil. And that would bring the price of gas down. So I have proposed concrete things to bring the price of gas down and to give people checks to pay for their gas.
Have these ideas been presented to President Biden?
They have. They were presented to Senator, to the Senate leadership, to the speakership, to the White House. I think the president's getting closer to endorsing the windfall profit tax, but we've got to do it. I mean, people are hurting in my district. They're talking about gas prices, food prices, the lack of baby formula. Those are flying or saying their flights are getting canceled at airports. We've got to act more decisively.
I want to talk to you about what I've noticed is happening with the Democratic Party. Again, I've been speaking to a lot of people, and people are leaving the Democratic Party, particularly African Americans. And I think we both know, like, the Democratic Party cannot win without the African American vote.
Of course.
And so basically what's happening is, like, for me, for example, I live in the Boston area, Massachusetts, but my family is originally from Baltimore, Maryland. And I can tell you that the Democratic Party has not improved Black communities in Baltimore. The schools are still underfunded. Poverty is still rampant. So I have to ask, does the Democratic Party have any type of plan to help African Americans in this country?
Yes, and I have been advocating that in addition to supporting voting rights, which is fundamental, in addition to supporting reform on police violence so that someone isn't shot when they're on the streets, we have to talk about economic empowerment. I have been working with the historically black colleges across America with tech companies to create jobs for young black women, young black men, so that they can build wealth. I've been pushing that we get funding for black entrepreneurs and businesses. I've been pushing that we have more disadvantaged business enterprises get contracts and more of them be black contracts in the federal government. Right now, we don't have enough federal contracts for black businesses. That's what Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta that changed the game. I've been pushing for more funding for black communities in the form of funding for K through 12 education and in terms of endowments for HBCUs. My view is that the party needs to have a broader economic agenda to make it possible for young black men and women to become entrepreneurs, to start businesses, to have good paying jobs, to own a home, and that we haven't had a strong enough economic agenda.
Some African Americans that I've spoken to, they're called the foundational Black Americans. They are saying that they're not going to vote for the Democratic Party unless there's reparations for African Americans who are descendants of slavery. How do you feel about reparations?
I'm for reparations. I am on HR 40. I was one of the first non-black members of Congress, if you look at the history, to support reparations. But the way I would have reparations is to target it to black communities, to black educational institutions, to black entrepreneurs to invest in those communities. So let's have the money go to K through 12 schools in black communities, to HBCUs, to funding mechanisms. To me, that is the way we should do it. But at the very least, we need to have the HR 40 pass and have a commission on what is the way to do it. The biggest thing is, though, to overcome the racial wealth gap, you need to overcome the racial wealth generation gap. And that means that the black community needs opportunity. They need funding. They need new, good paying jobs. There's an energy, especially in the Black South, where people have the ambition. They have the work ethic, but they're not getting the funding. They're not getting hired. They're not getting the federal contracts or the state contracts. So that is, in my view, what needs to change.
Another thing that I would add is the price of college today. So most of the people that I know, all of us have student loan debt. I don't know one person that went to college with me that didn't take out some type of student loans. But now, especially for African Americans, people are more hesitant to go to college if they have to take out student loans because they don't want to end up with mounds of debt. What do you think could happen in reference to college? I mean, President Joe Biden said that he was going to forgive student loans for students that went to HBCUs, but I haven't seen that happen. So should there be some type of loan forgiveness? Do you think student loan debt should be canceled? How do you think is the best way to move forward in reference to college education?
Well, I took out over $100,000 in student loans, and I was able to pay it back. But we need to have student loan forgiveness. I mean, that is essential. Those who say it's for elites just don't know what they're talking about. Most people who take out student loans come from the working class or middle class. Over a quarter of them are the first in their families to go to college. A lot of them are black women who have some of the highest student debt. And I've been saying this is something the president can do with a stroke of the pen to forgive $50,000 of student loan debt. It would do a huge service for the next generation to have the ability to start a family, to have a house, to start a business. And it would significantly lessen the racial wealth gap.
Why do you think President Biden is choosing not to cancel student loan debt?
Well, he said he's open to it. He said he wants to do it. And so I'm hoping in August, when this next payment is going to come due, he will announce it. My concern is I hope he just doesn't announce $10,000 because that's what people haven't been paying during COVID anyway. I mean, I hope he'll do something substantial. 50,000 seems like the right amount.
Right, because for some of us, that 10,000 barely covers just the interest. I think that's where a lot of us have gotten into trouble is the interest and not necessarily so much the loans. I do want to talk to you about Roe v. Wade. So I know the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. A lot of people are angry, and I do realize that this action was done by the Supreme Court. But I do want to add that receiving emails from Democrat politicians asking for money immediately after that overturn, it felt disingenuous and it made me feel like they're just trying to fundraise. The leak for that went out a couple of weeks prior, and I would argue that Democrat politicians or Democrat presidents could have actually codified Roe v. Wade into law already. So I feel like former President Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Carter, all of them could have done this. Why do you believe this wasn't done before?
Well, we didn't have the votes in the Senate. I mean, we didn't have the votes under President Obama in the Senate. Now, in the retrospect, we should have gotten rid of the filibuster. That's what we needed to do, to codify it. But we need to codify it now. And we've passed that in the House, and we should push to pass it in the Senate. Keep voting on it in the Senate to get it done. I agree we shouldn't be fundraising off Roe versus Wade, and this is about fundamental rights, about a person's right to their own body. And it's so fundamental that it's unseemly to be raising money off.
Well, Nancy Pelosi said in 2017 that Democrats weren't going to focus on abortion. Barack Obama said in 2009 that it wouldn't be a priority, even though when he ran in 2008, he said it would be the first thing that he would do. Recently, 18 Democrat politicians donated to Henry Cuellar, who is anti-choice. It seemed like to me, like codifying Roe into law, it feels like this was just a ploy to help Dems win in the midterms. I mean, why should Americans believe that Democrats in D.C. actually care about women's rights when you have Democrat politicians who are going along with anti-choice Democrats?
Well, we did pass it in the House of Representatives. I mean, we passed codifying Roe a second time. I strongly believe that we need to do it now in the Senate. And I think the action should be focused on how do we get over the filibuster and put pressure to get that through the Senate. But we did in the House pass the codification of Roe. And I'll tell you, I mean, there are times I've been critical of colleagues, but on Roe, my colleagues, almost all of them in the House, certainly believe it's a priority. Now, what I think the Democrats haven't done enough of is pay attention to the judiciary. The Republicans have had a 50-year strategy of voting on the court, of getting people on the court. And we need to be more intentional about making the court a real priority and strategy, because it's going to be now a decade-plus fight to re-engineer what we've lost.
But why? I guess for me, I'm looking at actions, right? So as someone who supported a lot of progressive candidates that went into office, as someone who a lot of us canvassed for those candidates, a lot of us donated money to them. And to see people not support someone like Jessica Cisneros, who was pro-choice, and choosing to endorse Henry Cuellar, it's the actions. It's those types of actions that people see. And it says to us, like, well, maybe you really don't care because you endorsed Henry Cuellar instead of his opponent, who was who was pro-choice.
I understand people's frustration. I do think that blowing out one endorsement, I mean, I respect that, but shouldn't be the limits. As I made endorsements over my 6 years in Congress that I'm sure people don't agree with. But I think ultimately we should be judged on our policy. And here the House did vote to codify Roe versus Wade clearly, strongly. And I think where we need to focus is on the Senate, and we should focus on the president and doing more. I mean, two concrete things the president can do: tell the FDA that the FDA should be providing medical abortion, and that we'll be providing those pills to every state. Have federal clinics that on lands and states where abortion has been made illegal to be providing abortion, and make it clear that federal law preempts state law. You can't arrest someone who's going on that federal land. So those are, I think, what we have to do is figure out how do we move forward constructively to protect women's rights. And obviously, people can judge any individual candidate based on the endorsements they make and factor that in and whether they want to support them. But right now, the urgency is what can we get done in terms of the agenda.
So I've been telling people that I feel that abortion is it's healthcare. It's a part of healthcare for women. I do have to ask in reference to healthcare in this country, because a lot of the squad members ran on Medicare for all. We had marches in this country last year in over 50 cities for Medicare for all. There's another march this Saturday that's going to be in DC, the Medicare for All March. And I have to tell you, I have been greatly disappointed to see that some of the same politicians that ran on that issue chose not only to not attend those marches, but not even to tweet about it. Cori Bush was the only one that came. And as an organizer, like it's really frustrating when you hear politicians tell you to organize on the outside and we're organizing on those issues that they ran on and they're not showing up. So at this point, some of us are asking, like, why should we even support them going forward?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of Medicare for all. I think we have to be bold in having hearings on it and supporting Bernie Sanders' bill. It's good for uh, America. I mean, it's good for our businesses. It's good for manufacturing. It's necessary, if ever, in a pandemic. I mean, the stories you hear of people still getting stuck with bills in debt for going to the hospital, for getting health care are outrageous. And we ought to cancel medical debt in this country. Now, I think we need a better system of making sure those of us who are strongly pro Medicare for all are aware of the activism and the marches. And I'd be happy to show up in the future, especially if they're in my district or in Washington, to those kind of marches. I met with a group, Medicare for All group, that is doing great work, and they wanted me to work on canceling medical debt. And I reached out to Senator Sanders. We're working on a bill to cancel that, about $290 billion of medical debt. But I am all for continuing to build and organize on that, and just need to figure out how do we get a better sense of communication so we know about the marches and can show up.
Well, I can tell you, I contacted multiple politicians, like offices. A lot of us did, and we were given the same story. At least I did for my state, for Massachusetts. I can't speak for your state, California, but we were given the same stories that, okay, we'll pass this message along, and then we never heard anything back. And I know that people can't be there all the time at every event. I totally get it, but I feel like they could have at least tweeted about it in some type
Yeah.
of
Was the march in
support.
D.C.?
Yeah, there was one in DC last year, and there's one in DC this Saturday.
This past Saturday?
This Saturday coming up, July
Okay, but
30th.
the challenge also is that the Saturday Congress is out of session. So I think when they do these marches, and we're back in our district. So I think they have to pick a date also that members of Congress are during votes or when Congress is in session, because a lot of times then when Congress is not in session on a weekend or in August, then members should be going back home, and so they come back home to our districts. But I am for these marches, and I would be delighted and happy to participate, and certainly to tweet out about anything that supports Medicare for all.
I have to ask in reference to force the vote. Like during a pandemic, we were asking progressive politicians to force the vote for Medicare for all. Not one member of Congress was willing to do it. And I have to say, like, it's been a great disappointment because how could you not? What is the right time? And we've been hearing this a lot, like now's not the right time. But during a pandemic, if you won't force the vote for Medicare for all, then when is it going to happen? So this is something I think that I'll be honest with you. A lot of us have left the Democratic Party. A lot of us are not supporting this movement anymore because we feel like at the end of the day, some of the politicians have decided it's more important to focus on their career and not focus on the issues that they said they were going to fight for. We just don't see them fighting. At least one of them could have came to the Force the Vote town hall. They made no appearance and they knew about it. So it's really frustrating. Like I hear politicians saying they support Medicare for all, but I don't see them fighting for it.
Well, we have made progress. We had 2 hearings on Medicare for all since I've been in Congress this term. I agree with you. We should have a vote on it. But the reality is that, well, Medicare for all was part of the Democratic platform until 1980. It got stripped during the Reagan Revolution. So what we're asking for is just going back to what this Democratic Party has stood for since Truman's age, what people have campaigned on for up to 1980. And we can do that, but we're not going to do that unless we continue to build the progressive movement. And I think we're close. Look how close Bernie Sanders came. Look at how much traction Elizabeth Warren got. We need to win. We need a progressive to become our nominee. Once we have a nominee, we can put Medicare for all part of the Democratic platform. Once it's part of the platform, we'll get a vote. But there is no shortcut to it. I mean, the reality is Bernie didn't win. We didn't have a person who carried the Medicare for all banner becoming our nominee. The best way to do it is to make sure that whoever wins the nominations going forward will return to a Medicare for all platform, and then we will have the votes.
So I know that one of the things I think that has been, I think the strategy may not have been clear. In reference to force the vote, the idea was to see who's who. Just like with the bill for a $15 minimum wage, it didn't pass in the Senate, but it showed us who's who. Everybody saw those Democrat politicians that voted against it. So people are still angry at Kirsten Sinema because of that. We need to see that. We need to see who was willing to say, no, we're not going to give everybody health care in this country. So I think there may have been a misunderstanding about the strategy per se.
Yeah, no, although the one way you can tell where people stand is just see who has co-sponsored Bernie Sanders' bill. And in the House, it's Pramila Jayapal's bill. I think we're up to 120, I mean, or around there. I mean, you can see exactly where someone stands. Look, I am for having a vote on it, but I want to ultimately win on it. I want to actually get Medicare for all in this country. And I will tell you, we have no shot of getting Medicare for all unless we get a president who campaigns on Medicare for all and wins and makes that part of the party platform. I voted against. People can look this up. Against much criticism for my party, I voted against my party platform in 2020 because it didn't have Medicare for all. People said, "Oh, I'm voting against the Democratic Party." I was one of the few people in Congress who voted against that platform. But we need a nominee who's going to put Medicare for all in that party platform, and then we'll get all the votes that we need. And we're close. I mean, I know I understand the frustration because if any time we should have had Medicare for all, it should be in a global pandemic. I get that. But remember how much progress we've made. I mean, look at how strong relatively the Congressional Progressive Caucus is. Now, I know people say it's not strong enough, it didn't negotiate enough, but people didn't even talk about the caucus. At least now we've got a majority of the House supporting Medicare for all. Look how close Bernie Sanders came to being the nominee. We can get this done, and but we won't if people disengage.
But one would argue that it's the big pharmaceutical companies as the reason why a lot of the politicians in DC do not support Medicare for all. And this goes back to a point that I've brought up multiple times on this show. I think corporate money needs to be removed from politics because it's really not fair. If you have a donor like Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna, obviously you're going to vote in their interest. And these are the people that are against it. That's why they don't want us to have Medicare for all, because their donors are the insurance companies. So is there any type of push to get big money out of politics?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. That's why we don't have it in California. I mean, Alex Lee and Ash Kalra have proposed single payer in California, and even though people ran on it to win, it's not getting through. And part of it, I think, is the big money and influence of big money that was spent in California. We've got to get our governor, our state senate to support it. And the same thing at the federal level. We need to ban big corporations from giving money. I don't take a dime of PAC money in Congress, but we should move much more towards citizens having vouchers where they can spend money on campaigns as opposed to the big private money that currently is dwarfing campaigns.
So I know you reintroduced a bill to implement 18-year term limits for the Supreme Court. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think every president should get 2 appointments, and that people shouldn't be on the court for more than 18 years. That would unstack some of the court. Right now, people talk about packing the court. What we ought to talk about is unpacking the court. McConnell already packed this court. This is a packed court. They should have had Garland on the court. They didn't. They put Gorsuch instead. And then you had justices that lied to the Senate to get on there. Let's have hearings for those justices. Let's unpack the court. Let's have term limits of 18 years. And then let's have every president appoint 2 justices going forward.
Do you think that maybe, because again, I go back to Obama, do you think that RBG should have stepped down?
Well, history is, hindsight is 2020. Of course, in retrospect, she should have. But that's why we need these term limits. So the decision shouldn't have been hers. The decision should be people serve for 18 years. And I have great admiration and respect for Justice Ginsburg.
So what happens if, let's say this bill passes in the House, but it doesn't pass in the Senate? What is the backup plan if that happens?
Well, then we're stuck. I mean, the president at least should come out for it. His commission has come out for it, and let's put the Republicans on the defensive. Term limits is a popular idea. 2/3 of the American public support it. One of the things the Republicans did when they overturned Roe versus Wade They've been fighting for this for 50 years, relentlessly. And that's one thing we can learn from those of us on the progressive side who want to now see it, women's rights restored, who want to see Medicare for all, free public college, unions. We have to fight, and we have to realize this is not going to be a fight for a year or 2 years. These are fights that are going to take time, but we've got to be vocal, we've got to be bold, and we've got to fight. And we've got to start somewhere and at least get it voted in the House.
So I have to ask about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. So they have been blocking a lot of legislation. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's just them. I think there may be other people that are, behind the scenes, don't want some of these things to pass either, but it's easier for Manchin and Sinema to be the fall guys and fall women per se. I'm curious. I have not seen them being held accountable. Like, have they been removed from any committee assignments, and why or why not?
Well, we need their votes. I agree with you that the president should get involved in negotiation. I was, several staff members were in Senator Schumer's office saying we can't give up on climate. We've got to negotiate. We've got to resume the negotiations. I agree with that spirit. And my view is that this has got to have the direct intervention of the president at this point. And all options ought to be on the table. But what we have to do is figure out how we get something done.
Why do you think he's not holding them accountable? And I ask this question because it's really disappointing for those of us on the outside when we see something that may have like good potential pass in the House, and then it gets to the Senate, and it's those two that stop it. And some of us are asking, like, why are you even a part of the Democratic Party? At this point, just leave. I feel like they're there on purpose to be roadblocks. And at that point, I felt like there should have been some type of accountability. And I say this because, for example, if you look at the squad, okay, Nina Turner's campaign, second time around this year, they were told not to endorse Nina Turner. And they didn't do it, with the exception of AOC, who did it the night before. I don't see this happening with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. I feel like nobody's telling them, no, you cannot do something. It seems like to me, they are the ones that have the most power right now.
Well, I would say Kyrsten Sinema's case, a lot of people are telling Ruben Gallego and others to run against her in 2024. And I'd be very surprised if she has any support among Democrats to hold on to her primary. And I fully expect a very strong Democratic challenge. And I would be backing that kind of challenge against her if Ruben or others entered the race. Joe Manchin's a different situation because he's representing a state that is 65-70% Donald Trump. But I think where you could get negotiations is with the president to sit down one-on-one, see where we can move and come up with an agreement. And I do think it's going to require the president's personal intervention.
I do feel like there's always a rotating villain. I feel like if it's not Sinema or Manchin, it's the parliamentarian. Under Obama, it was Lieberman. It's clear to me that these individuals, I feel like they're just scapegoats. I feel like the real reason why we're not fighting back, or they're not fighting back, is because they're answering to their corporate donors. Joe Manchin, for example, has a lot of money in the coal industry. So anything in reference to the environment regulations, he's going to vote against it. I don't understand why he's the chair of an environment organization and he hasn't been removed as chair.
Well, corporate interests in terms of the funding that they provide are a big impediment to progressive policy. But we can get progressive policy through. We got Dodd-Frank through. In the Obama years, the Affordable Care Act. Now, I'm for Medicare for all, but Affordable Care Act was better than nothing by far in getting people on health care. We were able to pass the American Rescue Plan with the child tax credit expansion. We got much funding down to the HBCUs. So progress is possible. Now, both you and I want it to be bolder and faster, but the way to do that is to continue to mobilize support for policies that are 60-70% popular and to get some form of campaign finance reform passed. I believe that the Progressive Caucus, progressive movement is on the verge of major victories. And what disheartens me is people who say, okay, we want to give up. Hold the Democratic Party accountable. Make the Democrats earn your votes. But, we need people's activism still.
I was reading recently that the majority of Americans want a third party. They want a third party politician. Like I've been done with the duopoly. People are done with it because neither Republicans or Democrats are actually helping the American people. Like we see them helping corporations all the time, but we don't see them helping us. And so I have to ask, I know that Joe Biden said he's going to run again in 2024, but based on what I've seen, there was Gavin Newsom had the meeting at the White House. Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris are talking about donors together. So we reported on this information. It seems like to me that they're obviously trying to put someone into primary against Joe Biden. I would actually say that 2024 would actually be the time that a third party candidate could actually stand a good shot.
Well, the question is, who's the third party candidate? It tends to be as someone who's a billionaire, and it's not clear to me that they're going to be for working families and the policies we want. Let's look at the Democratic Party's history. I mean, the party has gotten us Social Security. It got us Medicare. It got us civil rights legislation. It got us voting rights legislation. It got us the expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit. It got us strong union laws. It got us the Affordable Care Act. It stood up for women's rights. So I think that there's a lot that the Democratic Party has achieved. Now, we, in my view, ought to be making the Democratic Party a progressive party, a populist party, a party that's going to stand for bold policy. But it would be wrong to give up on a party that has achieved so much. Now, if there is an independent grassroots candidate who is standing for bold progressive policies, fine. But usually the independent third party candidates tend to be billionaires or celebrities. And it's not clear to me that those policies that they're going to advocate are going to be Medicare for all or free public college or the progressive policies that many people, your listeners, care about.
Well, I happen to know one here locally pretty well who was grassroots third party candidate, and that was Dr. Jill Stein. And when she ran, we were guilt tripped to vote for Hillary Clinton. That if we didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, then Trump would win. But I still say to this day that Jill Stein was the better candidate.
Well, I supported Hillary Clinton in the general election, and I'm proud of supporting Hillary Clinton. I think that Trump was such a threat to democracy and is such a threat to democracy. Look, if Hillary Clinton had won, we would not have had Roe versus Wade overturned. So I do not agree with people who supported Jill Stein, especially in swing states, because the costing of Hillary Clinton that election really led to Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court that we currently have.
Well, I would say that Hillary Clinton's campaign cost her the election herself. I feel like that was her doing. Ignoring the Rust Belt, I think, was a totally awful idea. You cannot avoid the Rust Belt. She should have learned that from Bill Clinton. He knew to campaign there. I would also add that having a running mate who was anti-choice, Tim Kaine was not pro-choice when it came to abortion, was also not a good idea. And I also think that Hillary Clinton did not talk to the everyday average person. She was talking at people instead of talking to them. And she's corporate. So for me, I was looking for someone who's grassroots, someone who actually cares about the people, someone who is not going to get us into these never-ending wars, and someone who really was going to get in there and fight. And Hillary Clinton was just going to be an extension of Barack Obama, and people wanted something different. So I don't blame someone like Jill Stein. I blame Barack Obama. I think he's the one that actually gave us Trump in the first place because he made all these promises and he didn't fulfill them.
I have a lot of admiration for President Obama. I think he had to overcome so much, especially as the first Black president, and he had significant achievements with the Dodd-Frank bill, with rescuing us. People forget what the economy was like back in 2008, the hand he was dealt with getting the Affordable Care Act passed. But I agree that we need to have more of a focus on working class Americans, on bringing production back, on going to the Midwest and the Black South and dealing with the consequences of deindustrialization. And that can be a agenda that the Democratic Party corrects on. But I think it is a devastating for this country that Donald Trump was elected over Hillary Clinton. And I was a proud supporter of Bernie Sanders in 2016. I was his co-chair in 2020. But after the primary, I'm proud that I supported Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. I do think that long term for the party, though, we need to get the progressive policies in our party platform. And we will only do that when we have a progressive really win the party's nomination.
Well, I can tell you as an African American, Barack Obama was not good for us. He militarized the police. Black Lives Matter, Ferguson happened under his presidency. Obama increased police funding. So you have black neighborhoods that are more so targeted by the police because of Barack Obama. So just because he was the first, black president, that doesn't mean that he was doing the right things. And I have to tell you that when it comes to the Democratic Party, this idea of identity politics, it's not selling well with people. You can't just be the first black this or the first Asian that. You have to actually do something for the people that's going to actually help and transform their lives.
Well, I do think President Obama did a lot to help people's lives. I mean, he got the Affordable Care Act. Millions of people didn't have health care insurance. We were in one of the greatest recessions, and he rescued us from one of the greatest recessions. He had checks on Wall Street's excesses with Dodd-Frank. Do I think we need more? Of course. I wish we get the $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all. But President Obama made significant progress. And I do think I agree with you that we need a universal message and focusing on policy, but I don't think we can discount the achievement of someone after 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow to have the first person of color in the Western world, not just America, and what Barack Obama represented because of his sheer tenacity. I think he is someone worthy of admiration. Now, of course, I'm biased. I worked in his administration, but I am committed to building on that and building in a very, very progressive direction with some of the policies that we've discussed.
But Khanna, Barack Obama bailed out Wall Street instead of the American people. I remember '08 very well, very well. When you had all these banks stealing black people's homes, Barack Obama chose to bail out Wall Street. So
well, I was against, and then I do have to go after. I know it's been a little over 30 minutes, but I want to give you one, just to finish up the conversation. I agree with you that it was a mistake to give those bankers those bonuses, and we should have had policy that was more targeted towards homeowners who were being foreclosed. But people have to be judged, I think, in the context of their times and holistically. And overall, there is no doubt in my mind that President Obama made a contribution to make this a better country, a more inclusive country than not. And the question is, where do we go from here? And I think that is adopting more progressive policy.
We'll have to agree to disagree with that one. But thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.